Hey everybody, Michael Church, Crawl Space Ninja. Today I have Michael Pinto with Wonder Makers Environmental, and he's located in the great state of Michigan. And I asked Michael to be on a call with me today because he is actually on a different side of mold. He trains mold professionals, and he's got a great look about how to train mold professionals, and even going as far as training mold professionals about dealing with people with super mold sensitivities, which is what we're going to talk about today. A lot of people don't realize how that can affect a person that's more sensitive to mold than others. And Michael, just want to thank you for being on the call, and please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, absolutely. First of all, let me say thank you in return. This is a real honor, and I've gotten to know a little bit about what you guys do as well, and listen to some of the other podcasts and stuff. So again, for me, it's just a thrill to be here and to share some of the information. But the leading question there is, what is the difference in some respects, if I can rephrase it, between a kind of a normal person and somebody who's mold sensitized? I should start out by saying, yes, I'm with Wonder Makers, and yes, I do a lot of training in the mold arena, both for inspectors and contractors and all sorts of folks, but I'm not a medical doctor. So I'm repeating the information that I know, not necessarily the information that I live in terms of, helping people on the medical side of things. We always refer them to the right, or try and get them to the right healthcare professionals if there's an issue with it. So that's what Wonder Makers does. We try and build teams in terms of helping individual clients, and that may include contractors, it may include crawl space contractors, it may include duct cleaning contractors, remediation contractors, house cleaning contractors, doctors, bankers, counselors, all can be involved in a team to help a person. And sensitized individuals are about 25% of the population can be mildly sensitive to mold, with anywhere from 2 to 5% of the population can be significantly sensitive to mold. So first of all, those are pretty big numbers. And second of all, they tend to answer the question as to why remediation contractors and crawl space fix-it people and that sort of stuff run into a lot of different individuals. And many times you'll be in the middle of that discussion. Husband doesn't smell anything, he doesn't feel anything. The wife does. She's convinced that she's sick from it, and a lot of times inspectors and contractors are caught in that middle in terms of how do they balance that. And one of the ways to balance that is just understand they both can be right, they both can be true. And because it's not as well known as some other medical diseases like allergies and even flu and things like that. Sometimes it's just the education process and validation that yes, he or she can be experiencing mold symptoms in this environment while the other person is not.
That's a good point. I've been in front of many husband and wife or partners or whatever, and one person, for example, has a better sense of smell. They notice that musty smell where the other person doesn't smell the cologne they have on, right? So that's one of those things. We've even had, especially ladies that have said, "Look, I can't even stand to be in my own house," and he doesn't understand. The other thing, especially if someone is staying home all day, and one of the people are home all day and the other one's going to work, the person at home all day, I assume, is also more susceptible to the indoor environment, obviously, than the one that's been at work for 9 hours and then comes home all day. Is that a true statement?
That is, and then some of the things that they do can contribute to that as well. So we had a case I wrote up in an article a few years ago where this woman ended up that she was mold sensitized, but she was home, and same sort of thing. The kids would go to school, husband would go to work. She's the homeowner or homemaker. And whenever she would start to feel that she was getting ill from the house, she would get her vacuum out. She would start vacuuming. She just figured that that's what she needed to do, would be to vacuum. Well, as it turned out, the water leak was coming from water heater in the utility closet, which was next to the living room. And the way that the concrete underneath there was running is that the water was going underneath the sill plate of the wall, or the base plate of the wall, and then underneath the carpet in the living room.
Oh, wow.
And basically, it was the bottom of the carpet and the pad that was the mold source. And so her vacuuming was doing the exact opposite thing. She was bringing up the spores, and of course it wasn't a HEPA vacuum. She was just vacuuming and getting the dirt, but she was putting the spores in the air and ended up feeling worse for that.
Wow.
So there's, we could spend hours talking about some of the cases like that are out there. But the fact of the matter is, if she didn't have the genetic predisposition to being mold sensitized, then she would be, like I said, the other 75% of the population, or the other 95% of the population that can have basic mold exposure. Everyone, let me back up and say that, everyone can be negatively impacted by mold. I mean, if you get enough of it in a short enough period of time, you're going to have allergy impacts, you're going to have respiratory things, you can even have short-term neurological problems and stuff like that. That's pretty well understood in the medical industry. What a lot of people don't understand is that for most people, they get an exposure like that, you get them out of the environment, and their body is able to clear those toxins out. Just like if you swallow something and eventually you flush it out, bad food or whatever, you cough it up or you flush it out, and then you feel better. And that's the way it is with mold a lot of times, is that most people, their body knows how to flush those toxins out. The ones that are sensitized, their bodies have a different mechanism in there, and it doesn't allow them to flush the toxins out, so it recirculates. And the best example that you might be familiar with, and a lot of people might be familiar with, would be like lead paint. If a child or an adult gets lead paint exposure, or just lead exposure, some of that gets breathed out, but other of it gets into the bloodstream, and then it starts recirculating and eventually goes into the soft tissue and goes into the bones, and quite honestly, never leaves. I mean, they do x-rays of skeletons of people from ancient Rome and stuff and see the lead that's still in their bones from the lead water pipes and things. So for some people, the mold is almost like the lead, where they can't get rid of it, whereas for the majority of us, we can. And then that sets up that differential between the one party that is sensitized and the other one who isn't in the same environment. And then they start to wonder, is the one that's sensitive, are they just crazy, or are they trying to make life difficult, or whatever? So.
Right. And I got two questions. Number one, you mentioned doctors, and I assume that this isn't like something that a home or a family physician is going to know a whole lot about unless they went through some specific training. So number one, could you give us some examples of the type of doctor that someone could seek out? And secondly, just a general overview of some of the symptoms and even maybe some of the more extreme symptoms for someone to pay attention to if they suspect that they might have mold sensitized. So do you mind sharing those with us?
Yeah, and if it's okay, I'm going to take them in reverse order. So let's talk about symptoms first, and then people will know about that, and then I'll talk about doctors and where they might want to go. So first of all, the last list that I put together that I tried to do from a comprehensive standpoint, I think I had 60 or more individual symptoms that have been recorded and pretty well documented as being related to mold sensitivities and contamination. The big ones, and this goes down the list of like starting with everyone. If you get enough of a exposure, you get allergy symptoms. That's going to be watery eyes, stuffy nose, coughing, sneezing, chest issues in terms of your breathing, things like that. The mold sensitized people, it typically goes beyond that. Then they start talking about, debilitating headaches, and a lot of things that end up what we call on the neurological side. So their fingertips, for example, will start to be real sensitive. They have extreme sensitivity to hot and cold. They lose words, and I know that's. I mean, I do that. I'm getting older and everything. That's part of that. But this is to the extreme. They have a thought and they can't get it to come out in terms of actually speaking and things. But there's lots and lots of kind of weird stuff. Temperature, what they call dysregulation. So you're just sitting there like this and, having a great old day. And you and I are sitting here and, if the temperature changes in the room a little bit, our body reacts to that and gets a little cooler. And so we generate a little bit more heat, or it gets hot and we start to sweat to compensate for that. And in the case of the mold-sensitized individual, they can't control that. So it'll be real hot and they start to shiver, or it will be real cold and they start to sweat. And just because their body can't sort some of these different inputs out, because again, it's some of the neurological sorts of things that are going on. One of the most fascinating things, and I'm just going to share this, is that there's subtle changes in their vision. And we know this because there's what they call a visual contrast sensitivity test. And even the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, so that's essentially on the work side of the issue, is now using that as a diagnostic tool to find out if people in the workplace have exposure to molds. So your vision changes subtly, and now they've got this test they've had this test for a long time, but now they can actually use it to help pinpoint whether it's a mold issue or it's some other sort of, eye issue or whatever it is. So there's, again, lots and lots of symptoms. And if you just go online, you'll see a list of those that will show up. Just punch in mold sensitive or chronic inflammatory response syndrome. CIRS is the medical terminology that these people fall under.
Okay.
So let's just start there for a second. If you go to your family physician and say, "Hey, doctor, I think I've got CIRS," he or she is going to look at you and tilt their head kind of like this and go, "Okay, what's that?" Most family physicians and doctors and, general practitioners, they're overwhelmed. Let's face it, they're still trying to catch up with COVID and all the studies there, and flu season's coming and all of that. If you tell them you've got chronic inflammatory response syndrome, they're just going to have to look it up and try and figure out what's going on with it. And sometimes they'll be responsive to that, and they will. And other times, it's really not in their bailiwick, and they'll try and find a specialist to refer you to. One of the things we found is that the people who tend to specialize in this, yes, there are actual medical doctors, and the ones who have done this, it's almost their whole practice now. Because once they learn about this and they start specializing in it, the word spreads, social media gets around, and there's so many people flock to them that it's becoming a subspecialty in the medical industry, and they tend to focus on that. The other area that a lot of our clients go to are functional medicine individuals. So we see a lot of physician assistants, we see nurse assistants, we see DOs instead of MDs that specialize in this. And, the integrative medicine practices, people who will think a little bit outside of the box instead of just, let's give them an antibiotic for something. Let's try and really find out what the root cause of this instead of always saying that drugs is the answer, so to speak.
Well, that's some good information. So someone can either Google CIRS,
correct,
or what was that other profession that
functional medicine.
That one, yes.
Yeah.
So they could Google that and maybe look for an MD or a DO or somebody like that in their area that does that. I met many years ago when I was first getting started. I met an MD that actually looked into air quality as a hobby, if you will. He studied it and all that sort of thing. And he really helped educate me about some of the Mayo Clinic studies that they did. And one of the ones that stood out for me was talking about how much we as individuals have even mold or fungus living in our sinus cavities.
Right.
And apparently it's pretty common. 90+% of us have mold living in our sinus cavities, because if you think about it, that's a great place for mold to be. It's warm and moist and dark, and all that sort of stuff, and so he introduced me to tea tree oil, and you put it in a little nasal thing and snurf tea tree oil. I guess diflucan would be a medicine, I guess, that would combat that. But he was sharing with me that a lot of MDs would misdiagnose it as a sinusitis problem and give you an antibiotic, which was not, that would treat the symptoms, but it wouldn't treat the fungus, So am I speaking to that correctly? Did I share that correctly?
Absolutely correct. That is actually a famous Mayo Clinic study from way back. I'm thinking that's probably 2005. So, 18 years ago or thereabouts. And their quick answer at the end of that is that if you've, within a year's time period, if you go in for sinusitis or a sinus infection more than once, in other words, the second time you go in, the doctor should be looking at it as a potential fungal infection rather than a bacterial infection. And then that treatment is going to change rather dramatically. They're not going to give you an antibiotic, because essentially what that does is just kill the bacteria that also might be in there, and kills off the weak fungus and leaves the strong ones in there to continue to repopulate. So either they'll use, as you suggest, the antifungal medicines with the nasal inhalers and stuff to get to the sinuses, or as you suggest, some of the more what I would consider to be some of the more knowledgeable or progressive ones will go a little bit softer and utilize some of the more natural remedies. And it's not just tea tree oil. There's a lot of essential oils that can be utilized in the different nasal foggers and sprays, along with saline and things like that. And I guess some of them, and I'm not trying to give a plug to it, but the nasal wash system now that you hear about on the radio like every day can be pretty helpful to people who have sinus issues greater than just the fungus being in there, because that's the other thing you have to distinguish. Like you said, 95 or 98. I mean, if you stick a swab like they would do for COVID or something up your nose and get into your sinus and then test it for fungus, the huge majority of people are going to have that come back positive for fungus. Just because it's in there doesn't mean it's bothering us or hurting us. And so it's only when it gets to the point where it's impacting people that you probably have to do something about it.
Well, and that tea tree oil was not easy to take. It felt like somebody shoved a lighter up my nose and lit it. I mean, it burns pretty good, So hopefully, like a neti pot. Is that what you're talking about? Like if you had a neti pot or something where you're doing saline, that's probably a lot easier on your nostril as far as the burn ratio goes than that tea tree oil. But anyway, I just found that interesting. I didn't even think about it till I was just talking to you, because he was such a great plethora of information about stuff like that. And doctors that have that kind of knowledge are few and far between, especially in the general practice. So I'm glad you shared where they could find that specific doctor that could maybe help them out. So.
And I absolutely want to make sure that I'm not, it's not like I'm dogging doctors by any means.
Right? Oh, no, me neither. Yeah, I agree.
They have an incredibly difficult job. They're trying to keep up with all the latest information that's coming at them from like a million different angles. And so just because they're not familiar with CIRS, or just because they're not tuned into some of the mold issues and things like that, doesn't necessarily mean that they're a bad doctor. It just means that if that's really what you think you're suffering from, you may need to get either a referral from them, from somebody that they know, educate them if they're interested in being educated, or, look and find somebody who specializes in that. And these days, if you just, go online and put in the CIRS, there's social groups out there. The social media is so strong with mold-sensitized individuals. You can get in some of those groups and you can, they'll direct you to different people. There's even one, I'm going to name her by name, Dr. Krista, Crista. You can just punch in. As far as I know, she's not taking any new patients, but she's got a blog that goes out every week. And it's just like a page. And I look forward to it. I mean, it's so interesting. Again, I'm not on the medical side, but I just learned so much from her, and she just puts that out every week to help people and all of her patients, and then it puts you in that community of people who are kind of there, and then you can talk online with other folks about what doctors they are seeing, find out if there's somebody in your area that might be, more knowledgeable and that sort of stuff.
Well, and I'll do some research, and maybe you can share that with me, but I'll put that in our description down below. So that way, if anybody wants to click on it, they can have that. I'm going to put your website down there too, just so you know, if anybody wants to reach out to you. If you don't mind, if we could switch gears just a little bit.
Sure.
So we had some things that we want to discuss. So let's say we got a homeowner that maybe thinks they're has some sensitivity, whether it's on the extreme side or the mild side. Are there some things that they can look for or do that to determine? I know you're talking about the lady vacuuming. She had no clue that she had that mold under her carpet. I'm curious, first of all, how did they find out she did? And secondly, are there some things that a homeowner can look for, whether it's mold coming from the crawl space or some other part of the home, or is testing the best way to handle that? Can you give us some idea about that?
Well, yes, I can. And I would, I'm going to, give you a little caveat in front here that Wonder Makers does do sample analysis and things like that. So I just want you to be aware of that. But it's really weird because even though we're a testing agency or testing organization, many times we don't recommend that they start with testing. It's, as you probably understand by now with all your work with the crawl space, it's all about water infiltration. If there's mold in a home or in an office building or something, it's because it's a water damaged building. And so the easiest thing to do, instead of, immediately starting to run samples or tests or anything like that, is use the best test possible, which is your eyes and your nose, and start looking around. And you don't have to even look for mold. You have to look for where water may be infiltrating into the home. So in the case, just going back to the lady with the vacuuming and the carpet who was so sick and everything, she did end up getting a sampling system from us. So she didn't even have to pay for an inspector to come out. You can get rental equipment that you can take samples and then send the samples back and everything. And once the samples came back as high as they did in that living room compared to some other areas of the house, it was like, there's got to be something here in this living room. And then started talking about, what's the floor plan, and then identified that the living room shares a wall with the mechanical room, and literally asked her husband to go in and check that mechanical room, and got a flashlight, had to get down on his hands and knees. And all of a sudden, when he got down and was looking in that kind of horizontal direction, he could see that the base of the wall 2x4s and stuff was wet down there. And then everything started to come together at that point. The only thing he did wrong in that particular case, and I'll just share this with you because this is important for your folks to know, is that once he thought that water was going underneath and he thought it might be getting underneath the carpet, what do you think he did?
Oh, he started tearing stuff out, didn't he? I can tell you right now, that's what he started doing.
Went into the living room against that wall, pulled that carpet back, and saw this, massive black mold underneath the carpet, on the bottom of the carpet, and on the pad, from the pad to the floor, and all of that. It was like, if we would have had a little bit of control in place before we did that, probably would have saved you some cleaning afterwards. But the fact of the matter is, they were so excited to find the source that was causing the wife's problem that, that was, in some respects, that was a minor portion of it. We were able to talk them through how to do the cleaning, and they basically did the remediation themselves. That's the other thing I would point out, is that sometimes you need professionals to help you just because they need to put up barriers and you want negative pressure and some other things. And sometimes it's pretty straightforward. And in their case, we knew that the rest of the house was probably contaminated from residual spores and everything anyway. So if the whole house needs to be cleaned, in some respects, you might as well just tear it out and get rid of the source, fix the source, and then come through and do that detailed cleaning. So,
And
that
some
would be-
detailed cleaning would be maybe fogging the HVAC unit, ductwork, different things that we were talking about, maybe going with something, or do you have other recommendations for to get those spores that maybe were released over time?
Yeah, so fogging is part of the issue, and there's lots of good products that you can use for that, but typically that's not the only way to fix things. You and I talked about this in the crawl space. You can't just go down and cover over stuff in the crawl space. If there's things that are wrong in the crawl space before you put a crawl space membrane down or something like that, you need to fix it. You need to stop the water coming in. You can't have it just rolling underneath the plastic. If there's mold there, you need to clean up and remove the mold before you start doing all of your other treatments and things like that. And so it's going to be the same way in a house. You can't just start fogging stuff and think that that's going to take care of it. You need to take care of the source material first. And when you're doing whole house cleaning, or when you think the whole house is contaminated, that's basically going to be either microfiber wipe or vacuuming every surface to start with. Because otherwise, you put the fog into the air, and that's going to be good. It's going to help drop some of those particles down and everything. But even if it's something that kills all the mold, it's still dead mold.
Right,
It's
still there.
Still stuff that's there. And the science and the medicine is telling us it's not just the live spores. There's chemicals attached to them called mycotoxins. There's beta glucans. There's little just parts and pieces of the mold that are around. And as much as some of these people that sell the fogging products will tell you that their stuff dissolves the mold or makes it disappear or eliminates it, the fact of the matter is that the fogging is going to be a piece of the cleaning process. It's not the cleaning process. So you're going to physically wipe or vacuum that stuff off. And then afterwards, it may be useful, and many times is useful, to use some sort of fogging, because you still have stuff that's floating in the air. And by fogging it, if nothing else, the small particles, even if it's not dissolving it, it's getting it wet, it's coalescing it together, it's making it bigger. It drops it to the ground, where then you can vacuum or wipe it off. And I'm going to point out one other technology here. I tend not to talk about individual products because there's so many good ones that are out there, but there's a difference between what they call passive air filtration and active air filtration. And passive air filtration is when you put a air cleaning device in that's got filters on it, and the air has to pass through it, and then the particles are all captured by the filter. The active devices either are ionizers or different sorts of materials that send out positive and negative charges into the air. Those charges glom onto, so a negative charge gloms onto this little microscopic particle, and a positive charge gloms onto this one, and positive, negative, opposites attract. And then first you've got 2 particles, and then 4, and then 8, or whatever. Pretty soon they're big enough that they start to settle out of the air without having to use the actual chemicals or even the water. So some of the air cleaning devices that aren't filters can be useful for people as well.
Yeah, I'm familiar with some of those, like radiant catalytic ionization, where it uses UV and some precious metals to send out the oxidizers instead of the mold having to jump off of the wall and go to the system. The system sends the source or the solution to the problem. So there's some pretty cool stuff out there like that.
Yeah, so typically if you're using the photocatalytic oxidation, they use different wavelengths of UV light, and then normally the reactive agent is titanium dioxide. So they'll have screens or very small, almost like filters in there that the light hits, and then that's what produces the different ionizers and the hydroxyl radicals and things like that. The technology is getting better and better. There's some that have what they call multi-cluster ionization now. Mm-hmm. And that's what I was mentioning just a moment ago, where you've got both negative charges and positive charges coming out of the device. But somehow they've got it figured out so that those two charges don't interact right away and cancel each other. They go out and hit the particles like we were talking about. So I'll be honest with you, I don't understand some of this technology to the finest detail. What I do understand is seeing the both actual science, meaning like the academic style science where they do things in test chambers, and more importantly for me is what I call practical science. How does this stuff work in reality?
Right.
Do my clients, if they use this particular device, do they feel better? Do they feel worse? Does the device leave an odor? You know, because some of the ones that use the UV light that you were talking about also create some ozone. So then they smell that, and that can irritate people. So you just, sometimes you kind of have to play around and get the right fix. And I think that's why they talk about it in medicine in terms of practicing medicine, because the first time through may not be the right place. And the same way with us in terms of dealing with people with indoor air quality issues and mold issues. Sometimes it's a little bit of practice. We try what we think is going to work first, and then it may be that we have to get there, through an alternate means.
Well, and I'm glad you brought this up a moment ago. I'm going to backtrack just a second. You talked about some of these mold cleaners, foggers, whatever, and how they're being marketed to the public as kind of like mold, removal liquid. They'll liquefy the mold and get rid of it. And, I feel like those kind of products, as well as these oxidizers you're talking about, there still needs to be someone to physically remove, or some way to physically remove heavy molds. Those products are great at killing the mold, but it reminds me of a dandelion, right? So you go out there and you spray the dandelion with some kind of, weed killer. Well, it'll turn brown, but it's still there. You still have to go out and pluck it out of the ground or physically remove it. And I think a lot of mold remediators try to go the lazy route and just spray something on it without physically removing it. And as you mentioned earlier, mold is an allergen, even if it's dead.
Right.
So it's just really important for people to realize that. Would you agree?
Absolutely. And it's a great analogy too. I take it one step further. So if you spray it when flowers are closed or when they're yellow, great. Your poison's getting where it needs to go, and it may actually eventually get down and soak all the way in and get the roots and everything. So there's some pretty good stuff out there. The difficulty is if you spray that when it's a white head and it's got the seeds are ready to go, just the act, and it doesn't matter that that's a poison or anything, just the act of spraying it, you're going to disperse those dandelion seeds. And then, if you didn't kill 100% of them, I just, at that point, I pray it's my neighbor's lawn, not mine, that it gets to, right? Because you're going to spread those around and they're going to start growing somewhere. So at least hope that the wind's blowing far enough that it goes next door.
Well, I appreciate you taking my analogy even further. That's even a better analogy, because that just shows that you can spray something on mold and it could cause it to react and go into like a defensive mode almost, to where it's trying to survive. So it spreads out, and that's a great analogy too. I like that.
Yeah, and I don't want to be negative toward the different contractors and the people that are using some of these different systems that are out there. But in general, if they're not doing something to address the core issue, meaning the water infiltration and the actual source of the colony, then I put them into a category that I just call spray and pray. Right. We're going to spray or we're going to fog something and we're going to pray that it works, instead of having some better understanding that we know that this is going to work. And if I can be so bold, I would say you've seen this in your industry as well. I mean, how many times have you gone in to actually fix a crawl space that somebody else has already fixed?
Exactly.
And didn't do it right? We're gonna spray something on the walls, or we're gonna do this, or we're gonna do that. And the reality of the situation is, no, that's not gonna fix it. We've got to do this right. So.
Well, I appreciate that. And we're running long on time, and I'm not going to get to all my questions I had for you. So I thought we could end it with this. Recently, I had Bruce Sneed from Kansas State University, and he talked great information about radon, and I'll put a link to that video down below. But one of the questions I have for you, being a mold inspector that does analysis and testing and things like that, do you feel that real estate transactions, that they should always do some sort of at least moisture testing, if not mold testing, on those real estate transactions? Do you feel like that's a good thing, a bad thing, or what do you think about that?
Yeah, so I'm just going to be a little bit more general than that. I would think that somebody who buys a house without having a good home inspection is foolish. All right. Now, a good home inspector is going to go through the progression of things that we just talked about. If it looks dry and tight and clean, they may not need mold samples. On the other hand, if there's any problems in the house that they see where there could be evidence, not just of existing stuff, but a lot of times on home sale, people have gotten the house ready. And so a good home inspector can kind of see where they may have covered some stuff up or tried to do improper remediation. And then that's where the samples become very important.
That's good. That's good, Michael. Well, before I let you go, did you have anything to add, or?
Well, we do have a lot of questions that still could be addressed. So maybe at some point in the future, you have me back and we'll take a second shot at it. But
yeah, I think so. This was around 40 minutes of us talking, and it's time flies when you're having fun. So I would like to have you back if it's okay. Maybe we could address those questions on a second interview with everybody. Would you be up for that?
Yeah. Well, I apologize for being long-winded, but you know me, once I get started on these stuff, I enjoy what I do, and there's so much information that really needs to be shared with people that I hope that your audience found it interesting, and that you can incorporate some of this into what you're sharing with your clients as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, again, this is Michael Pinto of Wonder Makers Environmental. I'm going to put a link to his information down below. And Michael, we really appreciate you coming on board, and I hope you all make it a happy and blessed day, and we'll see you later.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.